This conference will
today
now be recorded.
Dr. Marvin Henry from the Copernicus Institute for Sustainable Development of the University of Utrecht. And Marvin has been authoring a series of papers which have really inspired many of our ESRs regarding the transition towards the circular economy. And one of his most influential papers is the one where he developed a typology of business models for the transition towards the circular economy. Based on his recent research, today we'll be delivering a talk about startup business models which could be employed in the transition towards the circular economy based on some success stories which he identified during his research. I'm sure that his talk will provoke a lot of interesting questions and a nice debate. So the floor is yours, Marvin, and yeah, I think we have got enough time for having your presentation and then a very rich debate at the end, given that there isn't anything else in the agenda. So over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Andrea, for the introduction, first of all, and also to you all for giving me the opportunity to present my research, and then hopefully also discuss with you, get your thoughts and ideas, comments, critique. I'm very much looking forward to that. And indeed, I started with research which was part of my PhD, focusing on circular economy startups, and which obviously has quite some overlap with particularly this program, I think, but overall the work you are doing. So it's really cool to have this first touch point. I will go through that just briefly to myself. So I'm as I corrected you already or have to correct you in terms of the program. I didn't defend my PhD thesis yet. So I'm only Mr. Marvin Henry, not Dr. Marvin Henry. But yeah, as Andrea was saying, I've published some papers on the circular economy innovation. So this is basically my PhD, where I focus on the contribution of circular economy startups to an overall transition towards a circular economy. Showing today, I will show you one of the the first paper that I worked on, where we focus on this typology of circular startups. I will briefly explain you, a little bit of the background. Why is this a relevant topic? I think everybody in this call has an idea about this. I will show you how we approached it, and then also what kind of the approach was that we took in terms of the scope of the research and the methodology, just very briefly. To then dive really into the second part, the typology, kind of what frameworks did we underlie this classification of circular startup business model archetypes. One thing, as Andrea was saying, it's great we have the time in the end, so I will, of course, try to leave some minutes where we can discuss, but also if you feel free, if you have questions or comments in between, feel free to jump in, raise your hands. I'm not sure this function exists here, or just unmute yourselves and jump in. I'm happy to hear your contributions and make this as dynamic as possible. So first of all, where do we come from, basically? We really identified, and that was in 2017, that circular startups can be key innovators for a sustainability transition. I think it's by now even wider, and also back then it was widely known that the circular economy can be one of the kind of most important vehicles for or solutions to address sustainable development, because it really puts like a how. That's always how I say it, the manners to get there become much more concrete through CE. And the private sector, while it's a topic that's very much approached also from governments, the EU, China and many other countries are really also front riders. I think you find it in many city and municipal agendas by now. I've been to Australia for a research visit where there's also various federal states focus on circular economy, but also the private sector is considered highly relevant. And because they are the ones who basically can create closed loop systems really through circular business models, with the focus on multinationals and incumbents so far mostly. But what comes along with it is also the fact that whatever they do is really hardly measurable so far. So there's obviously a lack of metrics, but then which is also, I think, a big research area to maybe look into. But then on the other side is also many systemic barriers and structural barriers that incumbents and multinationals might face when transitioning towards CE. So we were looking at this then, and this from a more bottom-up perspective. Circular startups back then had not been identified, analyzed in a structured research approach yet.
Huh. What happened again?
Hello, Marvin.
Marvin, we lost you.
How have we lost him if you can see his presentation still?
Yeah, but his camera is blocked.
Yeah, for me the video is frozen.
Yeah, the video is frozen.
Maybe just cut the video and try to speak without the video. Just with the like this. Try to speak to see if it works now.
Can you still hear me? I think now you hear me again, right?
Yeah, we hear you again, Marvin. Sorry, there was a.
Sorry for the interruption. No, it's all good. I think it was my VPN that sometimes goes a little bit crazy off my laptop.
Okay,
but good we're back on track.
We'll keep our cameras on so that you can notice whether there is something that is not going okay. So yeah, that's fine. You can go.
Let me then reshare my screen. We've just stuck here. So how did we approach this? I was just kicked off, I think, at this point. So we looked at more than 130 circular startups first throughout Europe. As I said, we also looked at Australia later on, but the base for this research was really throughout Europe. That fulfill certain criteria, which you see here on the left, so that they really have a business model that is based on circularity. So on the micro level, not meso level like industrial parks, not macro level regulation and so on. Micro level operations aiming at closing product or material loops, or keeping resources in use for as long as possible while extracting value from them. Furthermore, they could not have been older than 5 years at the date of the interview or the data gathering. So since we started with data gathering mostly in 2018, they were mostly founded, like the maximum founding date could be 2012, 2013. Average, I think, was like 2016, 17. So quite young organization, must be independent. So maybe you've heard of Parley for the Oceans from Adidas and so on, and many other organizations that are kind of subsidiaries from global corporates. So these were not in scope of our research. And then, as I said, Berlin, it was focused on Europe. And we looked at startups in Berlin, Amsterdam, and the Randstad area in the Netherlands, which also includes Utrecht, The Hague, and also London. We chose these three kind of hubs due to the one part of their, like the one aspect was the kind of innovation and startup focus of these respective regions. And then on the other side was also an identification of a circular economy a policy that was already established in the municipalities, in the federal states, or so on. So we expected to find a high density of circular economy startups there. Additionally to this outside-in view, we also interviewed more than 30 startups in like 60 to 90-minute sessions with focus on business model, founder ambition and founder identity, and last aspect, their role in their ecosystem, which functions, players are relevant, how do they interact, and so on. Obviously, this part I'm presenting today was mostly insights gained from this first part of the interviews, which were the business models. Yeah, the sectors you see here briefly on the right. Agriculture, food was this biggest representation, particularly because we were looking at developed countries where the food, and then even urban areas where food systems are partly very inefficient. There's lots of waste. There's lots of selection already along the value chain. So this is kind of a resource stream that can be tackled quite easily from a circular perspective. But then also the materials manufacturing, as well as the built environment design, where other big aspects, so source materials, really startups focusing on fungus, mycelium, using seaweed or other bio-based materials, and then also city planning, urban planning, classic design, reusable materials, and so on, or recycled materials. So these were kind of the classic groups that we identified. Here you have a few examples, and maybe let me just spend one more thought here, and you will also see that in the second part. Based on these interviews and on the outside in analysis of the other 100 startups, we kind of mapped them according to the respective circularity strategies they pursue, as well as to the circular innovation types. And I will go through these in detail, but through this mapping, then we could really identify 5 archetypes that included then, I think, apart from 5 or 6 startups, almost all of them that were in our scope. And this is kind of the approach we took for this piece of research. A few examples just to make it a little bit more haptic, and I think you also work on some kind of hackathons in your program, so might be also a little bit of inspiration. We have really like high-tech B2B organizations, for example, like Acceleron, you see here in the 4th column. They do reusable batteries, lithium-ion batteries that are modular, where only the core is exchanged, so they have an energy as a service business model, while there's also more these like classic ones, if you want, like Surplus, which are Berlin-based, and collect surplus food from supermarkets and restaurants and sell them via retail locations or online shops, more the ones people might have in mind when it comes to these kind of startups. Other ones that I would want to show you is like Biome. It's a London-based startup who uses biomimicking technologies for their construction planning and use purely bio-based materials, mostly based on mycelium, so fungus structures. Furthermore, now coming into bio-based materials, Materium is an online platform where open source circular economy material recipes are shared, and I will show you a few examples on the next slide. And the last one is GoTerra. So they are a insect farming startup that do this in a modular and localized way. So also looking at the logistics, even if insects are farmed, and this is a good protein substitute, often there's high logistics involved. So they were saying, hey, we have them in containers at office buildings, at schools, or wherever, and you can use your waste to farm basically proteins. These are some examples, and here's a few, make it a little bit more tangible for you. So here, for example, at the bottom right, you see Materium's material database, which I find quite cool. So from kombucha, coffee, to bioplastics, there's recipes and ideas of what you can do with certain waste materials. Here's the kind of flexible and modular building material based on biomimicking techniques that Biome uses. The modular battery from Acceleron, so really modular design with purely the core being exchanged. All these startups, or many of them, also have collaborations in place with big corporates already. So Acceleron works together with Shell. Biome works with the Indian Tata Group. So there is really some interest also to see from multinationals and incumbents on these respective business models. Just to close the loop here on the top right, you see like a classic product selection from Surplus, which I showed you before, or then the insect farming at the bottom. Let me maybe stop here for like 30 seconds since it's quite some downloads. So is there any questions, remarks that you might already want to bring up before we go into the next part of the presentation?
I think there was a question from Akis and Tommaso. Tommaso, you want to go first?
Yes, I wanted to ask, how did you select these companies at the beginning? Did you find some existing database that group them in a single database, and also if you verified that their business model was really circular, or you considered every company that could have some elements of circularity, or adopted some of the practices?
Yeah, thank you for those questions. So the first question regarding the identification, we went through a classic desk online research. I think the most helpful source were city resources or municipal resources, where sometimes there's these organizations already gathered. And the second is awards, and there's a few Green Alley Awards and a few others, the European Circular Startup Awards, through where we started, and then it was really snowballing, asking for more, and then kind of diving into the respective regional ecosystems, because the founders are often very well connected, which, for example, was the case very much in Berlin. While in London they were a little bit more separate. And then maybe the last, there was the third, is circular startup hubs. So there is, for example, Blue City in Rotterdam, where there is more than 30 or 40 sustainable startups with a strong circular focus, co-located in an old swimming pool building. Also very cool installations. So these were the sources to identify them. In terms of the business models, we did a classic coding. So obviously we had the interviews where we also asked the founders, but we basically looked at their business model descriptions and then did a coding among two, like me and another one of the co-authors, independently coded the descriptions of the business models. Of course, we check that they're active on their homepage, or give them just calls, or so if they are delivering, and then did a coding independently, mapped it out together, and had discussions about those cases where we were deviating in our assessment. I hope that gives you an idea.
Okay, thank you, Tommaso. And there was also Akis, probably, who sent me a message.
Yeah, thank you, Andrea. Just a question about the sample. I saw that you included some circular startups from Australia. Am I right?
Yeah, later on, exactly.
But this didn't affect the homogeneity of the sample, or you did not include that on the paper?
Yeah. So this paper was a pure European focus. So in this paper that I'm talking about now, the Australian startups were not included. We did this. Yeah, we did this later on, and also in order to contextualize the European ecosystems. Of course, Berlin, Amsterdam, and London already have specific characteristics, and then we wanted to take it a step further and say, hey, actually, what is happening on this end in Australia? There's different policies, because their circular policies, for example, are not as advanced. They are more or less recycling policies that have been just launched last year in 2019, for example, in Victoria, the biggest federal state. Still, you find very advanced circular startups in that region. So we are, now that I'm more looking into this ecosystems part, that's where it becomes really interesting to have different regional scopes that can be also compared and inform each other. But again, for this research, they were not included in the sample.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, I would say we maybe move on, and as I said, I will always leave breaks. Otherwise, just jump in between. And now coming towards which also should give better context to Tommaso, what your question was. How do we actually derive this typology then for the startups? As I said, we had like two axes, the circularity strategies, which I will talk about now, and then the innovation types. First of all, I think you are all familiar with the 4R framework, which, yeah, of course, there's also 3 Rs to 9 Rs, but there was a research by Kircher from 2017 where the 4R framework was identified as the most dominantly used in literature, which would be reduce, reuse, recycle, recover. We added regenerate to this framework based on the analysis we did or the insights we gained through the analysis of the startups. Regenerate being really the leveraging of biological ecosystems and the benefits they provide, and embed them in business models. So this could be urban farming, reef roof, aquaponics. I was showing you GoTerra before. So really business models that, even though not fully measured, and of course this is something that remains to be then confirmed with actual numbers and metrics, KPIs, but business models that in tendency are already a closed loop per definition. So really nature-based solutions. I think the other ones I can go through quite quickly because I assume you are familiar with them. So reducing is really the kind of pre-market phase, like increasing product, the efficiency of the design or the manufacturing, using, substituting hazardous or energy or carbon-intensive materials and so on. Reusing is, of course, giving products or product components a second life. Recycling is rather kind of giving them a second life, but with different characteristics so that they are upcycled or downcycled, while recovery is really the obtaining of the embodied energy. So incineration, I think, is here the classic example. And then lastly, this is also in literature, as you might know, there's different impacts kind of associated. So normally the tendency would be that recovery has kind of the lowest impacts in terms of circularity, while reducing, regenerating, presumably has the higher impact strategies. What we then did is we mapped the startups along these 5 types of circular strategies, circular business model strategies, really giving like each startup one dominant R strategy, which you see here. So 6% in regenerate, 38% in reduce, and so on. And we also compared this with a reference study, which was written by Stewart and Nero, who did this kind of mapping with corporates. So they looked at 50 or 60 corporates and mapped those over the different R strategies or the approaches they take over different R strategies. And here we found out, first of all, that circular startups, so our first hypothesis kind of seemed to be confirmed, that circular startups pursue higher impact strategies. So almost 50% are in the area of reduce or regenerate with their business models, while this is a bit more than 20% only for the corporates. Another thing that I would want to point out here is this middle bar around reuse. This normally is a strategy that's quite resource intensive because companies have to implement reverse logistics. They have to have a good product data management, so they have to already know resource flows, be able to forecast, and so on. So that's why the corporates are stronger represented here, since they have this legacy information and also the resources to set this up. While for startups, this is often a manual process with high effort that small organizations have bigger troubles with stemming. So this is the part of the circularity strategy, circular business model strategies, which was one axis. The next one were the innovation types that were pursued by the startups, which we mapped with based on the different value chain foci. And here I should already say that these innovation types that you see here, and I will give you an introduction in a second, could be overlapping in our framework. So while the R strategies were one dominant, here we allowed for several ones, which has to be the case because they are not mutually exclusive. So as I said, we mapped them along the value chain. So the ones with downstream customer focus, the ones that are really implemented by the focal organization. And I'm just making sure, are you still hearing and seeing me? Probably not, huh?
Yeah.
Ah, good,
Yeah,
good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just making sure. So we are good on that one. Yeah, so the focal organization that are really, so to say, implemented inside the company doors, and then there's the upstream innovation types or categories, so the ones that happen with suppliers. On the downstream side, we have the classic servitization, so product service system innovations for renting, leasing, subscription-based, pay-per-use, and so on. And consumer involvement, so where customers bring back their materials, also corporate launch activities around this now, where you can take your old clothes to H&M and so on. Also collaborative consumption, so using of shared assets and shared ownership, as well as classic customer engagement and education. So open source knowledge sharing is also a big aspect for circular startups, which was quite interesting to see that many of them, when it comes also to scaling, do envisage it for themselves rather in an open source manner than in a kind of competitive IP protective approach. The focal organization categories are core and enabling technology. Core technology, really the kind of key design decisions for a product or service. So kind of, as I already was indicating before, different materials, a design that allows for upgradability, for better maintenance, and so on, or also product innovations, for example, for heavy industry processes. These were then rather high-tech business models and also solutions. Enabling technologies then rather around platforms, so sharing, trading, in B2B environments, in B2C environments, or also in peer-to-peer, as well as asset tracking. So there's also, you know, these like QR codes in clothes. You can see where they're coming from. So these were kind of the enabling technology focused ones. And then last, you see here two types: standards and industrial symbiosis. The standards, I think we can deprioritize to a certain extent. So startups do not have the market power often to, you know, establish wider standards in their business environment. So this was not so much represented. However, industrial symbiosis, meaning either I create as an organization value out of external waste streams, or I create value out of my own waste streams or residual resource streams, were very much represented. As you can imagine, and this is also where you can imagine that, you know, many startups have some form of resources they use that are residual for others, while they also have a product design, innovation, or collaborative consumption. So you already can probably imagine that these are partly overlapping, and we had to allow for several ones. In fact, there was like, I think there was 2.2 innovation types. So out of this list, that we coded for one startup on average. And again, here you see how they basically scored, so to say here. So overall, we had this like 130 startups. So we had like almost 300 or 280 innovation categories then basically. And they spread out like this. So with the biggest share in core technology, which again, you know, coming from this idea of them being rather disruptive with like design or platform solutions, gets confirmed here. What is interesting, that you see at the bottom, that like the innovation categories that also would foster or encourage socio-institutional change, so that somehow the supply chains are involved and have to change their practices, norms of consumers, consumption behavior is changed. So these innovation types were often combined with the core technology innovation, which also confirms, like coming from this research area of multi-level perspective and innovation systems, this confirms that, you know, new technologies, new innovations normally have to create the socio-institutional embedding for them to be successful. So this is something that we saw with many startups, that they tried to embed their respective core technologies into business models that also change them consumer behavior in the ways that allows for circularity of their respective products. So this was then the kind of mapping of innovation types. And out of these two, the circularity strategies and the innovation types, we could then derive these 5 archetypes of circular startups that you see here on the left: design-based, waste-based, platform, service, and nature-based startups. And what you see here is the respective circularity strategies or R strategies and the innovation categories, and shaded are the ones that were the dominant ones for that archetype to be kind of defined. The biggest group of design-based startups was really the ones that focus on reducing and core technology innovation, so the pre-market phase of products. Then we would have the waste-based ones focusing on recycling, mostly recovery, obviously, because it's mostly also capital heavy, was not so strongly represented, but mostly recycling. So they were trying to create value from unexploited external waste streams. Also very high-tech solutions, partly when it comes, for example, to CO2, which startups that were kind of coming out of research projects try to transform into activated carbon again, and so on. So also quite advanced technologies. The next would be the enabling technology. So the platform-based startups, as I was saying, marketplaces for idle resources or excess resources. The service-based startups, which is kind of, so to say, surprisingly a quite small group, while product service systems, servitization is normally often associated with circular economy. It's only less than 10% of startups that actually operate service-based business models. Example here could be, for example, Swap Feeds from Amsterdam, who rent out bikes instead of selling them, which obviously increases user efficiency, increases the number of bikes owned per person, increases the number of idle bikes then around, and so on. And the last one of this group, the nature-based solutions, so really the ones that kind of leverage nature-based biological systems and embed them in business models. I have a like 2-minute excursus on the last slide, which will be the next. But is there anything so far like that you would want to bring up? Some comments, questions you have so far?
I think everything is clear, so we can go on. Yeah,
happy to. So the last one is a little bit more like, as I said, was a little bit of an excursus about a recent paper I published with a group of researchers, where we basically looked at the circular economy and sharing economy and tried to do a bibliometric analysis of those two concepts, where we identified that the circular economy actually is very strongly driven top-down so far. So that's why it's very good that we are talking here and you are doing these kind of knowledge and research projects, because, you know, as you see here, they come from like the 50s, 1950s, 60s, the background of industrial ecology and environmental economics, and developed through like neoclassical interpretation, what like the circular, basically where the closed loop focus got a little bit taken away from this like initial idea of circular economy. And we are now trying to bring it back. But overall, as you see, has a quite systemic perspective, strong regulatory and policy pushes, corporate B2B focus, while we see the opposite rather for the sharing economy, which are, you know, have often regulatory restrictions because they are looked at sharing economy business models. They are looked at in a very incidental view in individual cities, but not like in a systemic, from a systemic perspective. Startups like Uber, Airbnb play a role here. And it's really peer-to-peer, and this paper is still like in open access. And what we basically propose is to use the knowledge and tools that you also see here on the right, for example, like blockchain, like sharing economy was pushed through ICT, information and communication technology, supply-demand matching, to use these tools in also like the circular economy systems in complex value chains or supply chains, allow for certain information sharing like product footprints, carbon footprints, while other product details might remain confidential based on a technological solution, right? So these are ideas where we want to kind of supplement the rather top-down character of CE with tools of sharing economy, and also vice versa. So also circular economy has a strong has strong tools like life cycle analysis, material flow analysis, very holistic concepts that might be used to then facilitate or improve also sharing and give, so to say, nature a voice in this kind of sharing that so far happens only between people or organizations. this just as a little, kind of knowledge nugget at the end, since this overall topic is circular economy bottom up. I think we also have to appreciate that in reality it has a very strong top-down push, and the bottom-up perspective is partly missing in practice. So this is something I think we have to commonly work towards. Thank you very much. I'm happy to jump back to any slides if you want to see them again. I can also share an excerpt of this afterwards if you are interested, and if some people couldn't make it because of this rescheduling. And as I said before, open for questions, remarks, or critique if you have any thoughts on that.
Okay. Thank you very much, Marvin, for very enjoyable presentation. For the questions, please, use the chat to write the question, or just to say that you want to ask questions. Who would like to start? Is there anybody who would like to start with questions? Akis wrote me privately saying that he had a question. Akis, would you like to go?
Yeah, although I think that it was covered by footnotes, I was wondering whether there are startups that fall into, let's say, different cluster categories. Back to VRs.
Sorry, can you repeat the last part, to VRs?
Yeah, I think that you have categorized them according to not only reduce, but also regenerate, reduce, reuse, and recycle, and recover. So are there like some components that fall into more than one cluster?
In fact, there were like 5 or 6 out of the 128 that went into this study that fell into more than one cluster. Here we approach it methodologically through qualitative assessment, either through talking to them or if we knew already enough, doing an own assessment. But yeah, since this share was so small, which was obviously nice, since we did it really bottom up, this assessment. Yeah, I think this is a quite comprehensive framework, but for sure there are some organizations that have such complex business models partly that you could allocate them to a variety.
Out of curiosity, do you remember from which sector they were from, more or less?
Yeah, not right now from the top of my head. I would have to open my Excel again. Sorry for that, but yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Of course.
I think there is Azar who would like to ask a question.
Yes. Thank you for your presentation. I really enjoyed it. In your last slide, I see that you're mentioning that we can use, yeah, this one. We can use blockchain in sharing economy, but how about circular economy? And are we able to use it in circular economy as well? And I was wondering if there is any startups dealing with this?
Yeah. Yeah, super interesting, and I think really spot on, Azar, because this is exactly what I'm also trying to propose in this paper, right? So that I think blockchain hashing in the first place, just encrypting information in an efficient way through technology, is something that can very much help to allow for proper lifecycle analysis. So what I also say in this paper that currently organizations in the value chain would not share product-specific information with each other, even though in order to make a really a primary data-based lifecycle analysis, you would have to do this, right? And this is something where blockchain could come into play, where basically only specific product information is shared. It can be ensured that the methodology behind the calculation and so on is consistent, but we only share specific product information. So this is one use case where I can imagine this happening. Startups that do this, there are a few. So there is Circular, they are called. They are London-based, so circular with an O in the end instead of an A, as well as Circular Tree in Berlin. These are startups that try to use blockchain technology to create transparency of carbon emissions in global supply chains. very early on, very concepts so far. So there's not like full-fledged solutions with like 50,000 companies using it, but there's innovations going in that direction.
Thank you very much.
Of course.
Thank you. And I think there is Kevin who would like to ask a question. Kevin, go on.
Yeah, my question is actually also about this slide. I was a bit curious, what is your definition of top-down and bottom-up? Because I'm used to thinking of top-down, like from the government, and then higher up the government, more top-down it is. But I know a lot of examples from, for example, business to business that are originating from the businesses and not so much from regulation per se. So I'm wondering if, yeah, your top-down definition might be different than mine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the definition is very much in line, I think, with what you said. So for me, it's like if it's a business to business and not peer to peer, for example, if it's policy endorsement, if there's global national policies that push this, EU policies versus like city restrictions and so on. And I see you wanna jump right in. That's good, yeah.
Yeah, no, because I know a lot of circular economy initiatives in business to business are focused on cost saving, and that's not necessarily because of regulation. I mean, of course, it's also from regulation in many fields, but often it's just saving costs. It's also why reducing is very popular with companies. How many policy, the less materials you have, the less cost you have. So I see a lot of bottom-up examples from circular economy in business to business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. So I think in the business context, what the most use case of circular concepts and almost sustainability in a wider sense is really in purchasing, right? And sourcing. So this is really where organizations say, hey, I can actually increase my efficiency on many ends, while they do not, which is partly also due to the fact of lacking measurability. They cannot really price it in yet or market it. Like everybody markets it in like very vague senses, but not in like, okay, we have to do a 7% price increase because we source this now from XYZ. So this is not how far our companies are, but they are rather, let's source it first of all from XYZ because we know it's improved efficiency. Still, this for me would all be in a kind of top-down perspective, because of these strong pushes from a business side. So every company basically now has like on their homepage, this is how we are circular, while there's a little focus in comparison to that on, or luckily it's growing, but there was even smaller focus in comparison to that to like from the ground initiatives, local initiatives, and so on, and how they can be scaled or how they can be made available to global audiences and so on. So this is kind of the idea we have here, combined with these disciplinary origins, which are also very much systemic, right? Where like in the 50s, 60s, the spaceship Earth was like a flagship a publication. Here, we have finite resources and we have to somehow create these loops, and coming from very industrial system perspective rather than in like a peer-to-peer societal consumer focus.
Okay, thank you, Marvin. I think there is Renato with a further question.
Yes, thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Marvin, for your very interesting and enjoyable presentation. My question is about those slides where you showed the comparison between large companies and startups. And my question is, if you find some kind of, the data seems that the two kind of company are complementary. Some are addressed to some kind of business model, and the other business models. So my question is, did you find any kind of collaboration, open innovation initiatives between the two kind of companies? Since the results seems to go in this direction, so they just share the markets into parts. One is addressed to one kind of business model, the other one to the other one. There are, of course, some reasons, but my question is if you have found some kind of common initiatives, collaboration, partnership, and so on. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Renato, and also for the kind of assessment of the context. Very interesting, and I agree to that sense that this is kind of the most expected natural evolvement of such a topic, right? And there are, like, to name a few, I know that Shell is like doing a big awards and competitions, for example, in the UK, where they, for example, work with, like, one of the startups you saw here, which is Acceleron, the one that does the reusable batteries and energy as a service. And they also have other startups, for example, for remote energy storage, so data-driven solutions where household energy can be sold in very micro transactions. And this is all driven, for example, by Shell. Another one is, as I was mentioning, Tata Group, so the Indian conglomerate, which works together with Biome because they want to use their, and Tata Construction, they are very heavily invested in construction. So they want to, for example, use these bio-based insulation material for their construction. Obviously, these are kind of really experimental steps so far, I would call them. So on a large scale, this has not really been, or I'm not aware of, at least, that this has happened on a very large scale. But I think these are the kind of most renowned or promising alleys that I've seen in this context, and there are surely more.
Thank you, Marvin.
Thank you.
I think Tommaso has got one more question.
Yeah, I see it. Yeah.
Yes, I can read it. So, did you have the impression by reviewing these startups that they have different long-term goals in terms of desirable growth they want to achieve in comparison to other startups that maybe don't have this objective of being sustainable in the market, and how they deal with the need of scaling up?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this refers, I think, to, as I was briefly mentioning, the second part of our surveys, where we ask the founders, like, what's your ambition, what's your vision for your organization, and also what are growth targets. Interestingly, like this first of all increased heavily. So when we asked them, what was your view on scalability in your very early stages, and I think this also differentiates them from the kind of classic, tech growth startup, they were saying, most of them were saying, like, scalability was included in our decision making, like sometimes relevant, while at the moment of the interview, where they were on average, I think, like 36, 40 months old, so like 4 years, they were mostly saying scalability is the key. So there seems to be a shift in the kind of organizational, or at least the founders' orientation for their organization. I think this is one insight that I can share here. On the other side, obviously, the big problem is then financing, right? So that many of these business models, what they often complain, also the founders, is that based on how they are set up, they cannot give, this like classic growth trajectory that is needed for high growth finance. This changes also a bit, I think, especially when you look at some startups you also see here that have like very tech savvy business models, partly patents. This obviously is a very strong point to gather financing, but many of them are really, as I also said in the beginning, see growth a little bit different than what you would expect from the classic startup. So that they really say, well, some who said, hey, I do this in the Netherlands now, and I do it in Ireland because I know there they cannot do it themselves. But for every other market, I provide all my knowledge, all the approach on how to do this. This was an indoor farming. I provide this knowledge openly, and I give classes and workshops and share my knowledge. So there's also a different kind of growth that many of these founders envisage, which is not I have to own the market and drive market growth personally, but I want to, diffuse the concept whoever does it, wherever it happens, the more the better. So this is, I think, something that I found very interesting in the conversations with the founders.
Okay, thank you, Marvin. I think Azar wants to ask one more question.
Yes, thank you. I was wondering if they have measured the social performance of these startups, and if these companies cared about the social dimension of sustainability as well.
Yeah. Also, it was also a very interesting aspect. So they, we asked them about KPIs and what's your focus, like society, environment, customer, supply chain. Societal is like not the biggest focus for many of them. Many of them are driven by providing value for society, but have not really formalized it in their business model. So they managed to formalize economic value quite well, environmental value quite well, lack of trees that have to be cut down, this and this and this in terms of saving, but societal aspects they barely formalize. So this is something that I found also interesting, where I was thinking maybe there's space for them to also include this stronger. On the other side, what they do is many of them also have like, let's say, like for example, they hire only disadvantaged groups, or like they have like strong societal visions or culture, let's say, but not formalized as part of their business models. This is, I think, how you can position it. So many of them have these like societal kind of aspirations, but lack a little bit the clear value formalization that they get out of it. Like but this is my very, very personal view. Not sure if they lack it, not sure if they need it. But if you want to say they should have a balance between the triple bottom line, that's the least represented.
Thank you. Yeah.
Of course.
Thank you, Azar, for your question, Marvin, for your answer. I think Kevin again. Kevin, do you want to read it, or?
I can read it. Well, I was wondering, when you just said about the company where people were also advising in other countries, if you also seen increasing in companies that are purely consulting, so they don't have their own product or specific service, but just consulting other companies to help them become more circular.
Not so many. There were a few. I know one specific example is what are they called again? But they're in Rotterdam. They're really like if so, it's mostly in the area of design, like this consulting part. So that are designers in fashion, or also in engineering, so process design, that then do consulting based on specific knowledge they have gained through an innovation they have been exposed to. This I would say it, but most of them are not purely kind of knowledge education based. Many of them have this as part of their business model, where they, as I say, like this kind of thinking of open source and so on, where they really also say, hey, we want to educate consumers. What can you do with your waste? There's different ways to think about it. So this is very strongly represented. But as a pure business model, there were only 1 or 2 instances out of really the 130 that at least I looked at or talked to.
Thank you, Marvin. And I have a question myself. Are you kind of following the evolution of these startups in time? Because I think given that now we have got this sample of startups, it would be nice probably for you to track their evolution, so that in the future you can perform some longitudinal studies. And the second question, what is the key message that a policymaker could draw from your study, in the sense that, I really liked your final slide where you were showing the diagram of how the sharing economy can supplement the circular economy view. What do you think, is the key message for a policymaker, in the sense, can we say that there are certain things within this transition to the circular economy which are better left to startups? So maybe, we should try to actively finance startups in that area, and are there areas where failure rates are higher? So it's really 2 questions in one.
Yeah. So yeah, in terms of the longitudinal studies, like I have not formalized that yet. So first of all, I want to still work, like I'm still working on two pieces. One is the founder identity, the other one is ecosystem part. But obviously I thought, yeah, that makes a lot of sense to catch up with them later. I was also asking like for some KPIs if they were willing to share, you know, like HR, personnel, growth numbers, and so on. So yeah, absolutely interesting. I'm not like I cannot give you, I think, a comprehensive answer where I'm saying, okay, they do well, they don't do well. I know of a few examples that are really, and these are also a few of you, the ones you have seen on the slides before, that are really catching attention and really moving things. And then, and I think this also is unfortunately also a bit shapes my answer on the second part. Since you know I do not have a track record. Okay, these types were more successful than others. That's why it makes more sense to foster their particular growth. So far, from my view, it's rather incidental that like some things really go big. Obviously, the ones that have real like have a core technology innovation are the ones that often grow better. But then there's also, you know, Surplus, who is very big, who has like own retail stores in Berlin, you know, for food and fully doing that based on surplus food. So you know, if you are good in operations like those, can be similarly a success factor. So that's yeah. The second part, unfortunately, I cannot give you yet the right answer. I particularly hope from this ecosystems piece, where we also, you know, ask them, what do you need? Who do you interact with mostly? Is it mostly internal, external activities you do? This will hopefully shed more light, particularly on this kind of yeah, forward-looking view, while the focus of this research is really more the descriptive one. First of all, nobody has looked at them. Let's see what's out there, and if it's worthwhile to look at them. Yeah.
Thank you. No, that's great. And I don't know if there is any other question. Maybe we have got time for a final one. Just conscious of time. It's 5 p.m. in the Netherlands. Anybody would like to ask a final question? Otherwise, that's fine. I think, you know, we have grilled you enough, Marvin. Thank you very much again for sharing with us this very interesting study, very rich empirical content, full of nice implications. And thank you very much again for your flexibility and for arranging to rescheduling the talk on such a short notice. And I'm sure that we will be in touch in the near future. We had a few weeks ago another seminar with Thomas Bowens from your research group, which also stimulated quite a nice debate. So yeah, we can clearly see that we are forging good links with Copernicus Institute. So once again, thank you very much. And I'm sure that the ESRs from the ReTraCE consortium might be in touch with you with further questions and observations regarding your study. But for now, thank you. It has been an amazing talk, and we have really enjoyed, you know, the debate that it has provoked. So thank you very much, and we hope to see you soon, maybe also in a physical seminar once the ReTraCE network will be resuming its activity in a more normal environment. Thank you, and talk to you soon.
Thanks, Marvin.
Thank you.
Thanks for everything.
Thank you very much. Likewise, it was a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Bye. Bye.
And yeah, as you said, happy to stay in touch.
Bye-bye.
Enjoy the winter school, and
Bye.
yeah, maybe I managed to dial in also for you have these final presentations, if I saw correctly. So I might be in touch if that fits. Happy to also join that.
Sure, yeah, definitely. Come along. Tomorrow we have some presentations from some circular startups, if that is of interest to you. So yeah, feel free to connect. These events are free to everybody. Feel free also to disseminate it to your network. So if you think there is somebody else who is interested, yeah, feel free to invite them.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And then I would say a nice evening to everyone. Yeah.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Bye.